Welcome back to Portuguese Path. Today we're diving deep into the first big block of the exam, the single most important section, arguably, to get right.
Absolutely. This is the critical starting point for anyone pursuing citizenship or residency, and it's called the CIPLE, which for new listeners is correctly pronounced CPLE.
CPLEH. Got it.
It stands for the Certificado Inicial de Português Língua Estrangeira. What makes it so critical is that this A2 level certification is the absolute minimum language requirement you need.
For citizenship or permanent residency, right?
Exactly. It is the language gatekeeper. And mastering this first component is, well, it's essential.
Okay, let's unpack this and set our mission. We're focusing on component I, which is a massive combined block of reading comprehension and written production. We've seen the metrics, and this section carries nearly half your final grade.
A whopping 45%.
So if you can strategize and execute well here, you've basically guaranteed yourself the momentum you need to pass the whole CIPLE.
Indeed. It's unique because the CIPLE exam assesses 4 fundamental language abilities, but the test administrators, CIPLE, they organize it into only 3 distinct components.
And component I is the heavy lifter.
It really is. It bundles compreensão da leitura
Reading comprehension.
and produção e interação escritas, or written production and interaction, into one single high-stakes block.
And what defines that high stake, besides the sheer percentage?
It's the time constraint versus the grade weight. This combined component is the single heaviest section, and it gives you 1 hour and 15 minutes.
To 75 minutes, exactly.
75 minutes to complete 2 very different tasks. That 45% is a huge number, sure, but the real difficulty, I think, lies in that 75-minute pressure cooker.
75 minutes sounds generous on paper, but here's where it gets really interesting and challenging. This is where strategy completely overrides knowledge. You're juggling 2 major tasks. First, analyzing texts, and second, physically writing 2 structured texts out by hand. So if you linger too long on the reading, trying to translate every single word, you suddenly find yourself with maybe 30 minutes left to compose 2 different messages.
And that clock runs ruthlessly fast. Panic is your worst enemy.
The time trap is real.
It is. And it connects directly to the underlying rules. So you mentioned the overall score needed to pass the CIPLE is 55% combined.
Right, that's the headline figure.
But the critical element that often trips up otherwise fluent candidates is the minimum threshold rule. You are required, and this is non-negotiable, to achieve a minimum score of 25% in each individual component.
Oh, wow. So you can't just ace the speaking part to make up for a bad writing score.
Not at all. If you manage, say, 90% in oral and 80% in listening, but you only get 20% on this massive component, the whole exam is a fail.
That's brutal. So it's like a marathon. You might sprint the last mile, but if you didn't clear that first hurdle, the race is over for you.
That's a perfect analogy. This component demands not just preparation, but a very precise time strategy.
Okay, let's dive into the specifics of that first half. Compreensão da leitura. What exactly is the A2 user expected to demonstrate here?
The underlying objective is functional literacy.
Functional literacy, so not literature.
No, forget Shakespeare or deep analysis. At the A2 level, they are testing whether you can survive in a Portuguese-speaking environment. Can you understand simple, practical texts you see in daily life? It's about finding data, not interpreting nuance.
Okay, give us some concrete examples of what lands on the exam paper.
So this is usually the first thing you'll tackle in Component I. We're talking about real-world texts. Think simple instructions, information from public signs, notices you might see on the street or in a government office.
Or at the train station.
Exactly. You absolutely must be able to read and interpret a transport timetable, for example. Figure out departure times, platforms, or closing hours.
Right, navigating public life. What about things like, going out to eat or shopping?
That's a huge part of it. You will likely see something like an aumenta menu. You'll need to identify the parts of the meal, distinguish the prato do dia from the desserts, maybe understand basic prices.
Makes sense.
You might also encounter classified ads, which test your ability to scan for keywords about housing or jobs. And, maybe most critical for health and safety, reading basic instructions on medicine.
Okay, that's a good place to pause. For medication instructions, what are the key pieces of information you have to be able to find, and what are the key Portuguese terms?
This is where specificity really saves you. For medicine, you need to grasp the intended purpose, like treating dor de cabeça, a headache, or tosse, a cough.
Okay.
And you must identify the posologia,
Posologia.
which is the dosage or instruction for use. For example, Understanding phrases like tomar uma vez por dia, take once per day, or depois das refeições, after meals. The questions will always hinge on these factual points.
So it's very literal.
Very. If the instruction says take with water and an answer option says take with juice, you just need to spot that objective mismatch.
That's a highly strategic point. So you're saying the goal isn't full translation, but targeted data retrieval.
Precisely. Candidates waste so many minutes trying to translate every single adjective in a simple ad. The key is to look for keywords. Dates, times, locations, prices, and critical verbs like probido forbidden or aberto open.
So skim, don't read.
Skim for the facts, circle the keyword in the text, and match it to the answer. If you can get through the reading questions in under 30 minutes, you've saved precious, precious time for the writing section.
That transitions us perfectly to the second, equally important half of Component 1, Produção e Interação Escritas. This is where most of the anxiety spikes because you have to produce two small texts under some very strict constraints.
The anxiety is warranted, but it's manageable with practice. The challenge here is not grammatical complexity. It's A2, after all. It's the adherence to objective constraints and, those strict word counts. It's about being concise.
Let's detail those infamous constraints. Task 1 is short, quick, and informal.
Correct. Task 1 is typically a brief communicative interaction. A short message, a note, a postcard, maybe filling out a simple form or describing a lost item. This task is designed to be surgically concise. The word count is strictly constrained to 25 to 35 words.
Not 24, not 36.
You have to hit that window.
25 to 35 words, that's like 2.5 sentences. You can't even really afford to be polite.
You absolutely must be functional. Even the greeting and the closing, they count towards that limit. So if the prompt asks you to ask about a friend's holiday and remind them about a meeting, every single word has to serve one of those functions.
Wow. Okay, and task 2 is the slightly heavier lift.
Task 2 is a more structured production, usually an informal email or a letter, maybe to a landlord or a colleague. The complexity increases because you have to include 3 or 4 specific mandated content points from the prompt.
So they tell you exactly what to say.
Exactly. For instance, the prompt might say, 1, apologize for missing an appointment, 2, request a new time, and 3, explain why you missed the first one. The limit here is strictly 60 to 80 words.
If task 1 is a note, task 2 is a functional paragraph. But 60 to 80 words is still incredibly short for hitting 4 separate points. How do people avoid the most common mistakes here?
The pitfalls are twofold. Pitfall 1. Candidates write too little. They don't address all the mandated points, and that's an automatic deduction.
Right.
Pitfall 2. They write too much. They go over 80 words trying to use fancy grammar or unnecessary phrases, and that also leads to deductions. The goal is concise, objective communication. Cover all the points, but not a single word more.
It really sounds like the writing section is less about showing off your vocabulary and more about demonstrating highly structured, disciplined communication.
It is. And this is exactly why this section requires specialized preparation. You just cannot wing a 60-word email that covers 4 points under time pressure. The structure has to be automatic.
I know this is the section that injects the most anxiety because that dual constraint, the content and the word count, is brutal. Speaking personally, and for anyone else struggling, I struggled with the writing part until I started using the templates on prep2go.study.
And that experience really underlines the value of targeted practice.
It's much easier when you've practiced the actual format.
It is. Templates, or pre-learned frameworks, are a lifesaver for timing. But they only work if you understand what they're for. A common mistake is relying on them blindly. You need to know that your structural template for task 2, the greeting, the intro sentence, the body, the closing, only uses about 15 to 20 words.
Okay, I see.
That leaves you the perfect amount of space, maybe 45 to 60 words, to fill in the required content points concisely.
So if I know my opening and closing take up 20 words, I know I only have 40 to 60 words left to make my 3 points. That keeps me from rambling past the 80-word limit. That's extremely powerful.
Absolutely. Effective preparation requires practicing those structured responses until they're second nature. This automaticity saves you time and helps you hit those word counts without having to stop and manually count every single word under pressure.
Okay, let's zoom out again. If we put both the reading and writing tasks back together, what's the big picture strategy for managing the entire 75-minute block?
It's critical to approach this as a timed mock exam from day one. Candidates are strongly advised to allocate their time deliberately. And this is actually governed by the rules of the exam itself.
How so?
The reading section has to be answered using a pencil, but the writing section must be completed with a pen. This implies you should dedicate a solid block of time to each, without bouncing back and forth.
I see. So what do you recommend?
We recommend completing the Comprehensión de Lectura section in about 30 to 35 minutes maximum.
That's quick.
It forces you to skim and not translate every word, and that leaves you the remaining 40 to 45 minutes for the writing.
Which sounds like enough time, but you still have to produce 2 carefully worded texts.
40 minutes is the minimum you need. Writing, unlike multiple choice, requires you to physically generate the words. You have to think, compose, and write legibly. Try to do it in less than 35 minutes, and you risk making catastrophic errors.
So this is where those full-length simulations that mimic the real CIPLE format come in.
It's the only way to master the timing and structure. You can't afford to waste time drafting on scratch paper. The responses have to be practiced enough to just flow concisely onto the exam paper.
So this entire component is a masterclass in efficiency under pressure. It's about recognizing simple information quickly and communicating concisely.
That's the perfect summation. Master the ability to skim those menus, those timetables, those dosage instructions, then combine that with the disciplined precision you need for the writing tasks. If you secure that 45% foundation and hit that non-negotiable 25% minimum, you've overcome the biggest single barrier of the CIPLE exam.
If we connect this back to the bigger picture, why is mastering the CIPLE right now, this year, so crucial?
Because the environment is changing. The CIPLE currently remains the absolute benchmark for language certification for nationality and residency. However, there are legislative discussions pointing toward a potential new, broader integration test.
A new test.
Yes, the TNIC. It's tentatively scheduled for full implementation around 2026.
And what would that involve?
Well, the details are still solidifying, but it's expected to be broader than just language. It could incorporate cultural and historical elements.
Wow.
Which underlines the urgency for applicants to secure their CIPLE certificate under the current predictable rules. Focusing on this specific defined language test now avoids the uncertainty of whatever new, more complex requirement may come in the future.
That's a fascinating and, frankly, somewhat provocative thought. So this exam is the predictable route, and that route might be changing its nature soon.
It might.
So for those of you aiming for residency or citizenship, the CIPLE isn't just an opportunity, it's an urgent strategic choice. The lesson is clear. The reading and writing component is the absolute foundation of your CIPLE A2 success, carrying 45% of the score and requiring sharp, timed execution in 75 minutes. Don't just read about it, practice it. See you at prep2go.study. Ciao.